Great. We have two case studies, quick fire, 10-minute case studies on use of data, which is very relevant throughout all of the sessions this morning. If I could welcome Ken Hart, the founder of Snowdrop Solutions, to the stage, who's going to talk about location-based data. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks. Thank you again, Heather, for organizing this. It's really great to be here today. And it's good to be in person. I don't know about many of you, but I have a bunch of people in the company who've been working. They're in their mid-20s, early 30s. And I explain, I'm going to go to an event. I'm going to talk to people. And they're like, really? You do that? That's still occurring today. So I'm going to spend a few minutes now talking about a couple of use cases. Snowdrop, a little bit of background on the company. It's been around for almost 8.5 years. We work very, very closely with Google Maps. Raise your hand if you've ever used Google Maps. That's it? No, I'm just kidding. So we work primarily in 3 sectors. Real estate, raise your hand if you own property, right? So hopefully you've been to some of our customers, Zoopla, Rightmove, Foxtons, et cetera, right? We also work in the travel sector. Not a good time to work in the travel sector, I'll tell you that. And about 4 years ago, we started this journey in financial services with this company at the time called Mondo, which is based in Old Street, if you guys are familiar with them. They changed the D to a Z. And really, I remember, I'll just be a little anecdotal story here. We sat down with their CTO, brilliant guy, and he said, we're creating a bank. I was like, oh, really? You can do that? I didn't know. And he said, yeah, we're going to create a bank. And don't look at the HSBCs or the Barclays or the Lloyds. We're not going to learn anything from them. There's something called PSD2, open banking, and we're going to do things a little differently. I said, well, what's the problem you're going to solve? He said, maybe many of you that have this. Have you ever looked at your bank statement? I say, what is that? Raise your hand. Yeah? No one? Well, about 5% of all transactions, people go, what is that? I don't understand that transaction. Anyone take a guess what percentage of calls to a bank's call center deal with people going, someone's ripped off my phone, my phone or my card, right? 10 to 15% of all calls in the UK to a bank's call center have to do with people panicking about a transaction they don't understand. Anyone know the average cost for the bank when they pick up that phone? 10 to 12 pounds, just to pick up the phone. Mrs. Smith, how you doing today? Can I have your date of birth? Go through security, all that sort of stuff. Why? For data that people just don't get. This is not rocket science, guys, right? So what we do is we work with Google Maps, and we change the messy name into a clean name, add the logo, and if you need more information, you click on it. That transparency of data, that experience matters. So Mondo changes to Monzo, launches this. A few weeks later, I get a call from a lovely lady, Ann Bowden, Starling says, I want the same thing. Sure. Moniz, same thing. Here in the UK, you're fortunate. You've been at the forefront of these digital banks. I forget which of the speakers earlier had mentioned the amount of VC money being invested in this, and it is kind of crazy, right? And these are simple experiences. Why are the digital banks doing this? You don't make a lot of money in retail banking, but you do capture engagement, and you build trust through transparency, and then you can do other services for them. So here's some of the metrics. We launched with a bank here in the UK, about 5 million users based in Swindon. You can guess which one, right? Anyone using that bank here? Yeah? Okay, you ever see the logos and the name? Hey, very pleased. So what we do is immediately go, yeah, I see the transaction. Any of you use Monzo, Starling, any of those customers in the room, right? So hopefully you know what I'm talking about, right? Very simple stuff. And as the prior speaker just mentioned, when we started doing this journey about 4 years ago, it was really expensive to scale up and do 1 billion transactions a month. Now, I can pay for it with my credit card with the Google Cloud bills that we have. The cost has come crashing down for the use of machine learning, and we've gotten also very good at what we do. So this stuff is available today. This stuff is at your fingertips today, and the real business impacts today. So let me share a couple of other things. Forget the money for a moment. We talked about that S-curve. Things change over 10 years. Monzo recently, I think this may be a year or two old, won the best brand in the UK. Not the best bank. That went to Starling. The best brand, right? So that is how much the users are totally engaged with Monzo. How many of you have ever been in a meeting like, oh, the consumer experience doesn't really matter? Anyone been in those meetings? Let me tell about my meeting when that happened. I was at Yahoo in about 2006. Remember that guy? Big company, right? I was in a meeting, 2006, mobile, what's it all about? The CEO of Europe takes out his BlackBerry and says, I don't get it. I'm very happy on my BlackBerry. Why change? Anyone know what Yahoo's worth today? I don't even know. I don't follow it. I think probably my stock options are, been bundled up in little balls and put into the fireplace for kindling at this point, right? Things change, and that ability to create engagement, transparency, and trust really matter. We're talking of my real-life example, sitting in Shaftesbury Avenue at Yahoo not too long ago, people fail to take into consideration where the eyeballs go, where the trust and the engagement. Where that dissipates, where that goes away, you can't upsell them other services like financial investments. So what we're seeing now is the UK led the way in many of these digital banking experiences, but now this is taking off. I'll give you an example. About 18 months ago, I was having a talk in France with a large bank there. And the one said, oh, French customers, we don't need this. French customers don't need to see where their transactions are. We don't believe in transparency. Okay? Ever heard of Lydia, Quantos, Swile? All three now unicorns last year alone just in France. Huge opportunity for people to replicate, in part, what has been proven in the UK is now catching on worldwide. If you look at Latin America, other big banks now up on NASDAQ, like Nubank. And if you look at the emerging markets like Indonesia, 287 million people, 25 to 30% of the entire population is unbanked. Right? You talk about that S-curve, that's really where you're going to have the massive impact. And what's the average age of the Philippines? Anyone know? About 20. Average age of Italy? 48. Right? So who do you think is going to be a bit more comfortable, digitally savvy? Right? You're going to have a lot more users getting into their first banking experiences through their phone. This stuff matters, the consumer experience matters, and the data is available today. What else can you do with the data? You can give real-time fraud alerts. You can show people their spending habits. How are you going to convince me to invest if you're not giving me an ability to understand where I'm spending? Right? You need to establish that benchmark of what good looks like. And the advice that I would have to anyone working in wealth management is don't look at the other wealth management companies. When we work with Zoopla and Rightmove, they don't look at each other. I mean, they kind of do, right? But when we sat down with one of those two, they said, I want the Airbnb-like experience. They're learning from other industries. They're learning from best practices outside of their sector that the consumer experience is really just, better. And so what they're doing is they're importing expertise and understandings, not from their competitors, but from outside the sector. I would strongly urge you to think about something similar. How many of you have sold your house or your apartment in the last year? It's been a tricky year for that, right? No one? Yeah? So what happens is you call up, Foxtons or someone like that, or Connells, and have this very seasoned person show up, walk in and say, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, what a lovely home you have. Let's sit down on your beautiful couch, great, beautiful kids. I'll go through my iPad here, and I'll show you all the homes I've sold, just like yours in your property. The secret is winning the house, getting the listing. This is called that's what they say in American English. It's getting the seller to give to the agency of the home to sell. Afterwards, they just flog it on, Zoopla, Rightmove, right? The estate agent's job is to get the property. And they sit down and they have that combination of good personal skills, but also the data in the iPad when they go through to really establish their credibility. Oh, and by the way, Mr. or Mrs. Smith, where do you want to move to next? Maybe we can help you there. Do you want me to organize a move? Do you want me to sort out your electricity bills? We have all that stuff on our website to manage your move for you. that is probably, I would argue, probably a good place to look at, because frankly, buying a home for most people in the UK is the biggest, most expensive decision they'll ever make in their lives. Something like 40% of the UK lives month to month, paycheck to paycheck. Right? What else can you do? Once you understand people's spending habits, you can start showing them other areas where they're having impact. Carbon footprint, recycling, minority-owned businesses. What's important to you? But having that sense of precise data, you build that trust and transparency with people and say, hey, if recycling is really important, we can tell you what percentage of your shopping spend is with companies that actually live up to the values that you want. And maybe it's 32% this week, and we'd recommend A, B, and C to get that number higher. So again, having the foundation of good, clean data, but combined with that user experience where you're talking to them, you're giving them the ability to choose what are the attributes of the values they want is quite important. I know I have another speaker, so I'm going to rush here. And I'll just say, don't wind up like me when I was at Yahoo, okay? You don't want to be there. The user experience matters, right? Learn from outside of your industry. And as we talked about earlier, the previous speaker, the innovation curve goes quicker than imagined. So I'll be around if there's any questions. Thank you.
Let's get Alexandra first, yeah. Great, thank you, Ken. We've talked a lot about declarative communication and segmenting customers and making that visual transition. If you think about your pension statements and the way that funds are listed, if you could make that change from that, code of it's indecipherable from where those transactions happen to something that makes sense and is visual, would make a really, really big difference. Our next speaker, with again short fire case study, Alexandra Ross from Tumelo. Tumelo?
Yep.
Tumelo, okay, sorry. I've got pomelo in my head for a minute there. Probably thinking my gin and tonic that's going to come later. Those of you who aren't familiar with Tumelo, it's a platform to allow people to do shareholder voting to drive engagement in pension funds. So with that, hang on, I'll get to the beginning of your slide. There you go, perfect, thank you.
This is the next.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, great. Okay, so, wow, 200 people is a lot of people. I don't do this often, so I do apologize in advance. But yeah, I'm Alexandra. I work with all things data related at Tumelo. And as the title suggests, more data is better. Data is valuable, but more importantly, what matters the most, at least to us at Tumelo, is the quality of data. So, what Tumelo is about is transparency and shareholder rights. Our aim is to better connect investment platforms, pension providers, fund managers with their members and underlying investors. So essentially, on one hand, we have millions of people in the UK paying monthly contributions into their pension pots, not knowing what companies the money is going into and what they've been invested into. And this is the transparency aspect of Tumelo. So we show those members the list of companies that they are invested in. On the other hand, we have fund managers managing the funds of these investors, having to make decisions, voting in annual general meetings, not knowing what the interests are of the underlying investors. So that's the second aspect, the shareholder rights, where it comes into play. We help connect the two parties together and share the interests there. So as a quick kind of data pipeline from a user perspective, there are, in how data gets essentially collected, there are 5 steps that one can go through. So I'll take myself as an example. I'm invested in a pension scheme. So the way this works, I get an account with Tumelo, which I can access. So this is step number 1. Step number 2 is I can then view my portfolio and the companies I'm invested in. Step number 3 is based on my portfolio composition, I can then vote on proposals that are available to me. Step number four is users like myself and others, once they've voted, Tumelo collects the data and then communicates it to the fund manager, so the fund manager can make a more kind of informed decision on the subject. And step number 5 is that once the annual general meeting has taken place, it then gets communicated back to me as an end user, the outcome of the proposal. In order to connect the 5 points together, there are many data sources that we as a company have to work with. The very first one is the provider and scheme. Again, going back to the same example of me being a person invested in a pension scheme, so who am I? What pension provider is it? What scheme am I invested in? What funds? Is it a default fund or a self-select fund? Then the fund manager comes into play. So the breakdown of the organizations that I'm invested in, the way the fund manager is voting on my behalf. Then we have the industry sources where we collect the information on the organizations themselves so that the users can learn about what they are invested in, so what company it is, the industry it's in, the country, the location, and the list goes on. Then there are also the tracking data as well, so which tracks my interests, how long I spend reading about a certain company or the industry that I'm most interested in, etc. We have the email that notifies me as a user about the proposals that are coming up and where I can place my votes or the outcomes of the general meetings as well. And the member platform where I place my votes, the availability is listed for me and where I can always go back to learn more about the product and my portfolio in general. So depending on who the final consumer is and looking at kind of the collection and the aggregation here, the data gets put together in different ways, depending if it's a fund manager that we need to talk to and translate the interests, or whether it's the pension provider, again, looking at the interests of the investor. So do we have any fund managers in the room here today? No, but okay. Well, this is something that would have been of the most interest to fund managers. So this is just a typical example of a pension scheme and the general stats that are associated with it. So in a typical pension scheme, we would have around 16% registration rate, which is about 3 times higher than the industry standard. There's the about more than a quarter of those who initially register, then go on to place votes on the system. The return user rate is at around 40%, and once the user is on the platform, they are kind of in it for good, and they continue returning 2 months down the line, and and further as well, about 20, just over a quarter as well. The email opening rate is at 50%, which is double the industry standard too, and we have the click-through rate at around 4%. So essentially, the users are with the email open rate, the 50%. The users get notified about the coming proposals and the outcomes of the ones they have voted on. So the interest is there and it continues to grow. Where do the interests lie in general? When we publish proposals on the Tumelo platform, they get assigned a category, and most of the proposals, they fall into the management category. So the management category is the one where most of the fund managers most of the proposals that the fund managers vote on do also fall in that category. So the shallow end of the chart. But what is kind of interesting here the interest levels of the users, and they fall into the deep end on this side, with animal welfare, defence and security, human rights, environment and equality coming as the top 5. So these proportions are worked out on the basis of what was available to each individual user and what they have voted on. And what this means essentially to fund managers and to the industry as a whole is that the investors, they want their voices to be heard on the deep end here, so the top 5 categories on this side. They are happy with fund managers making decisions on the management, where most of the proposals fall in anyway. They do have strong voices there, where many are against the CEOs being paid 200 times the average salary, etc., or the board members being selected. But the main point to take from this slide here is that they want to be heard on the proposals related to this side. And as a quick example as well, we have 2 very similar looking proposals from Kroger that were published on the Tumela platform. Both are related to the environment and plastic packaging, recycling. The difference between the 2 is that the one on the right was published ahead of the annual general meeting in 2020 with 93% of investors voting in favour and only 60% of their fund managers being aligned with them. And if we look on the right-hand side now, we have year 2021. Again, the proposal was published ahead of the annual general meeting. 95% of investors have voted for, and 83% of fund managers have also voted for. So the alignment, you can see a staggering difference there in terms of how a year and how good quality data can make a difference. There's another example here, a very controversial topic and something the users are extremely interested in, the workplace harassment. There are 2 examples on the left-hand side with 2020 annual general meetings. 50% of fund managers being in line with their underlying investors for the Walmart proposal, and 33% of the fund managers being in line with the underlying investors for the Delta proposal. And if we compare that to the right-hand side now, the average difference is at around 40%. And the last example, again, another controversial topic on the pay gap and workplace diversity, 43 and 50% compared to 86 and 90%. And this just shows that this is where the user interest lies, and this is something that the data can highlight. And if we use the data correctly and if we extract the right data as well, this is the difference that can be made, and we can make this world better. And yeah, my time's up. So amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, fantastic sessions from Ken and Alexandra. Thank you. You'll have to grab them in the coffee break for questions, because I know you probably need a coffee. I know I do. But that example that Alexandra gave, I think, was really instructive for me. And we talk a lot in the industry about sustainable investing and ESG, but it often gets simplified to customers are really only engaged on environment. But actually seeing animal welfare, human rights, breaking it down into those categories and getting people involved in prioritizing the decisions, I thought was really, really powerful. So thank you. And so really, really great case studies.